You're listening to episode 27 of the Ento Podcast, and on this week's show we look at how to improve a protein-rich diet to a growing population. Most of the world eats bugs. The Nordic Food Lab thinks you should too. A bug-eating festival is coming to Williamsburg this weekend. Gourmet grub. Thai fine diners explore insect cuisine. So all that's coming up in this week's episode of the Ento Podcast, so stay tuned.
Looking to stay up to date on all things entomorphagy? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Ento Podcast with your host, Ross Bell.
Hi, and welcome to episode 27 of the Ento Podcast, the show that brings you the latest news and views from the world of entomophagy and insects as animal feed. I'm your host, Ross Bell. So this week we've got 4 stories. And the first story we're going to cover comes from Forbes. It's entitled, How to Provide Protein-Rich Diet to a Growing Population. As we all know, the world's population is due to increase from 7.6 billion to 9.8 billion by 2050. And with this increase, we're going to have to try and find some food to feed them. An example is beef consumption in Asia, which is expected to jump by 44% over the coming decade. But this increase in animals raised for food has an effect on the world's environment. The number of farmed animals soared during the 20th century and is now standing at around 20 billion chickens, 1.5 billion for cattle, and around 1 billion for sheep, which use a quarter of the world's land use just for grazing, and they consume around 30% of the crops that are grown on the planet. So how then do you feed the planet sustainably? The article in Forbes sets out 3 solutions. Solution 1, convincing people to put different things on their plates. 2, artificial meat, and 3 is changing the animals' diets. Solutions 1 and 3 involve the use of insects as either food for humans, as in solution 1, or using the insects as feed in solution 3. But other points raised in solution 1 are vegetarianism, but as the article says, try telling people in sub-Saharan Africa that they should stick to just eating cassava. The use of farmed fish is another solution they raise, but the use of these farms has also led to issues with the ecosystem of the sea. The final point in solution 1 is the use of insects, which as we know are high in protein, vitamins, and already eaten by around 80% of the world. Unfortunately, they too have an issue, and that's generally a yuck factor associated with it that people have got to try and get over first before they start consuming them. The article then goes across to solution 2, where they cover the use of technology to create artificial protein. And so far, Bill Gates and Richard Branson have just been a couple of the high-profile backers that have put money behind artificial meat startups that grow beef and poultry from animal cells, as well as scientists that are looking into genetic modifications to animals by increasing the size of the muscles in cattle or to reduce infections among farmed fish. I feel that both of these solutions have got a harder hurdle to pass than the use of insects, and the fact that unlike insects is a brand new food source, and trying to convince people that stem cell meat or petri dish meat, I think it's been called previously as well, is not only safe but tasty, whereas we can turn around and say 80% of the world or 2 billion people are already eating insects, so we know they're safe, we know they're tasty. So this is we've got a sort of slight advantage over the stem cells. Next in the article's solution 3, where they cover the altering the food that the animals consume. Now this is an easier solution, as apart from organic food, people generally just don't care or don't even think about what foods the chickens have been fed on or what the cows have been raised on. You've got a tiny percentage of people who actually would go out and look for organic meat or grass-fed beef or corn-fed chickens. I believe that the rest of the general public, it doesn't cross their mind that the animals are fed on anything bad. One of the examples that they use in the article is the use of data-intensive farming, just helping improve agricultural yields of soybeans, where they're able to monitor the use of the water and the soil composition to alter the fertilizer. But this sort of thing, where you use data-intensive, can be easily added into a hydroponic sort of growing system, similar to the one that's in London in one of the disused underground tunnels. The issue with that is that they are quite small and you're not going to feed a lot of people from the size of the hydroponic systems that we've got at the minute. Another example that they quote, which has worked well in aquaculture, is a reduction of fish meal in fish food. And this was used in the Norwegian salmon farming. In the 1990s, 90% of the salmon feed used in the salmon farms was fish meal. But by 2013, a greater use of plant matter had been brought in, and this reduced the fish meal content down to 30%. This then cuts down on some of the issues that we've got where farming fish, you throw in a lot of food and the excess food then just changes the whole ecosystem of where the farms are. They also talk about Cargill gas fermentation facility over in California. I hadn't heard of this before, where they're making feed from natural gas. So what they do is they've got a bacteria that they feed methane to. Once this bacteria sort of is fed on the methane and is grown, they can then turn the bacteria into a protein pellet that they can feed to livestock. The article also mentions in the sort of last section, so insects are an option. Flies and maggots can be raised on manure and organic waste instead of grains and then fed to cattle, chicken and fish. And we've seen this recently in the EU, where they've been given permission to start using insects as aquaculture feed. In previous episodes of the podcast, we've also sort of covered stories in sort of Melbourne and around the world where people have been farming black soldier fly. This sort of kills two birds with one stone, so they're using the organic waste that's not being sort of thrown into landfill, raising the larvae, and then that larvae is then able to go be fed to animals, and is also the waste matter is then being sold off as a fertilizer. So I'll put a link to this story so you can have a read through it. The second story we've got this week comes from Time Out, and it's a bug eating festival. It's coming to Williamsburg. Remember in season 3 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer when the mayor had to eat all those creepy crawlies to attain invincibility? Apparently it's not far off from reality. And for 3 days this weekend, you have the chance to taste the new frontier of exotic eating at the Booklyn Bug Festival. So over the Labour Day weekend, from Friday to Sunday in Brooklyn, there's as the title says, a Booklyn Bug Festival. And the festival invites insect-friendly chefs, scientists to venues like TBD Brooklyn, Kinfork 94, Brooklyn Kitchen and Guadalupe Inn, where you can learn more about entomorphagy from industry leaders and gain a cultural understanding and point of view from artists and visionaries who will be joining the presenters and workshops. So the available panels that you can go and look at or go and listen to, there's insects as functional ingredients and meat replacers, and what does human culture say about insects as food? There'll also be food available from chefs like Matthew Peters, the bug eating cookbook author David George Gordon's going to be there, and festival creator and chef Joseph Yoon. Tickets for the event are around $200, and I'll put a link in the show notes where you can pick those up. Most of the world eats bugs. The Nordic Food Lab thinks you should too is our next story. And this comes from Forbes and it's by Christina Trottino. So this story covers the Nordic Food Labs, who are an open source non-profit operating out of the University of Copenhagen. It's an interview with Roberto Flore, who's the head of their culinary research and development. So those who haven't heard of Nordic Food Lab, they're linked to the Noma restaurant, which is Copenhagen's world-famous restaurant that's run by chef René Redzepi. René came up with the idea of the food lab. So he was realising that the general day-to-day running of a restaurant was holding back some of the creativity of their chefs. So what he do is he's now got this separate sort of section where he has other chefs and people who travel around the world looking at different foods, looking at different ingredients, and they're the creative R&D, I suppose you'd probably call it from a manufacturing perspective. They're sort of the R&D department for the Noma restaurant. So in 2013, the lab started looking at the world of insects, and this journey has been filmed. There's a film out there called Bugs. Really great film. If you get a chance to watch it, I'd highly recommend it. It's not, or as far as I know, it's not on Netflix or Amazon or one of the download sites, but it does usually do the rounds at the film festivals. So I've seen it a couple of times in the UK. There was a Green Film Festival last year, earlier this year. I was sort of there, and then the year before, and when it came out, there was a Q&A where I was able to watch it with Josh, so one of the main guys in there. So as well as the film, they've also written a book on eating insects. It's essays, stories and recipes. It's split into two sort of sections. The first section are, as it says, essays and stories. That bit, it's interesting, it can be a little dry. And then you've got the recipe section in the back. Really nice photography, some great recipes, so little to high end, but it makes a great sort of coffee table book, which reminds me I should do a review of the book at some time and put that out. Final story today is Gourmet Grub, Thai Fine Diners Explore Insect Cuisine. It's by James Draper and it's on the Mail Online. Bangkok's first fine dining restaurant has opened and according to reports is popular with locals and tourists. Insects in the Backyard is located in Chang Tui, an arty district in western Bangkok that's filled with vinyl record stores and local fashion designers. Co-founded by Regan Suzuki, I'm going to massively mispronounce this surname, Perajamaki. Sorry, Regan. He's a Canadian national and used to work for the NGO sector with remote rural communities, many of whom incorporated insects in their cuisine. Regan says that insects are more than just a gastronomic trend, they're a potential panacea for an increasingly crowded and meat-hungry world. As insect eating is nothing new in many of Thailand's rural areas. So in the rural north, insect consumption is particularly popular, but that's mainly due to the drought-prone climate. And even in central areas of Thailand, where it's fertile all year long, insects are still eaten as a snack and often deep-fried or served with seasoning or a spicy sauce. As we know, insects require a fraction of the costs for land and feed and the energy to farm compared to staples like chicken and pork, which make them really cost efficient. And by making high-end dishes with insects, they're hoping that the wealthy middle class in Bangkok will try and reduce some of their meat intake and stick to the local food of insects and try and sort of get it back into the Thai diet and try and change people's perceptions of insects being a general food rather than a poor person's food. So generally we've seen this throughout history where the food will be eaten by poor because it's all they've got. As the gap between sort of rich and poor grows, the more money you have, you then want different meat, which is why we're now seeing an increase in beef intake in China is going to raise because the middle classes have increased, which then sort of turns them into sort of like a Western diet where you then look down on people eating insects. It can go another way. People in the West are now sort of trying to bring insects in and try and level it out a bit. So the other way this could go is a similar way to lobster and oysters, where they used to be a staple poor person's food, but nowadays are considered sort of delicacies and mainly for people with a little bit of money behind them. Insects in the back garden, so some of the food that they have on offering include crab and giant water beetle ravioli, wild green salad with pan-fried crickets, scallops with crisp bamboo caterpillars, and for dessert you can enjoy a classic tiramisu made with silkworm powder. Since it's been open, it's had sort of rave reviews from food critics in the area and tourists. So that's it for this week. If you're in the UK and you're interested in trying to incorporate crickets, why not pop over to Crick 8 and pick up a packet of our cricket protein powder. You can find out more at KRIC and the number 8.co.uk. Till next week, this is Ross saying ta-ra for now.
Thanks so much for listening to the Ento Podcast. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit theentopodcast.co.uk and on Facebook and Twitter at the Ento Podcast. We'll catch you next time.